questions like, where does the water come from? Or, are there rattlesnakes? Or, why are the mountains red? These are kind of big picture questions that we are going to address today.
Okay.
All right. That was the end of the hike. How's everybody feel?
Good.
I'm just kidding. That's one of my bad jokes. Public on that one. So, I like to stop here as my first real point of interest because it's the only bridge we're going to cross. And also, during the right time of year, you might see some water in here. You can actually see what is the remnants of it that dried up bed there. What we're looking at here is the very first reservoir. This is the reservoir put in by the Wilsons. And this reservoir would have fed a ditch irrigation system, an above ground irrigation system that would have flooded the pastures and the orchards. You can actually see remnants of it right there, that concrete block. Now, this area here, as far as a scientific or a natural history perspective goes, is really important because this is our first riparian zone, or wetland. Riparian is a formal designation given to a stream or a riverside. Riparian also can imply a spring itself, not just a stream or a river. Also, a wetland usually refers to a larger body of water. These words are fairly interchangeable. Really what's important is we are now witnessing the power of water on the biology of the desert. Looking around us, we can see that there's these large, broadleaf deciduous trees all around us. And these are remarkable. These are not normal trees, or these are not the usual suspects, we could say. Right here behind you, you have a Fremont cottonwood. It's got those kind of heart-shaped leaves. Right here we have some coyote willow, which is those nice slender leaves. And then we also have some of our native Arizona ash back here. We also have some invasive Russian olive. And all of these trees need a constant year-round supply of water. When this is full, it might deceive the visitors that this is that year-round supply of water. It is not. What we're actually witnessing here is a real spring or a real seep in action. This grove of trees, as well as the grove of trees here behind us, has water that is coming out of the ground year-round, at least enough to make the ground muddy. Where we are today, usually, especially in the winter, all of this is muddy looking, this whole stretch of trail that we're on. Right now, though, because of the incredibly dry temperatures and the lack of precipitation, it is very dry. In fact, I was up in the Springs a couple days ago to take some pictures, and it is drier up there than I've ever seen. So we are definitely in a situation right now where we are low on water, let's say. I'm not saying we're running out, but we're low. So, as we walk through here, the thing to take note and the thing to really impart home is that we have this great contrast between the wetland, these big broadleaf deciduous trees that need that year-round supply of water, and if we look past the dry lake bed, we can see what is our blackbrush community. This is the community of plants that have adapted and evolved to live in places incredibly specialized plants, which also lead to incredibly specialized animals. Let's keep walking up the trail though. You can actually see right here underneath some of the steps a little bit of dark coloration in the dirt. That is that seepage, that water coming out. Off to our right, you'll see some yerba manza. This is the plant that has white looking flowers. We'll talk more about that as we get into some nicer patches of it. But it's at least worth pointing out.
Because it's a Y?
Yeah, yerba, like, I think it's Spanish for sweet. If anybody knows their Spanish better than me, they can correct me. But yeah, Y-E-R-B-A, yerba. I always like to stop right here for a couple sakes. One, there's usually shade here in the morning. Never a bad idea to stop in the shade, as we kind of learned on some of our other walks. Especially this hike, always a good idea to slow down, stop in the shade. The other reason I like to stop here is if you all turn around, you're going to get a bird's eye view of that canopy, that wetland canopy. This is a very important part of the bird ecology, the avian ecology here, is this canopy of trees, especially for our larger birds of prey. Things like our owls, which include long-eared owl, our hawks, the red-tailed hawk, and other predatory birds are going to use this high roost in these perches to lunch from as well as to nest in. These wetlands are a hotspot of biodiversity. In any arid environment, wetlands compose about 0.4% of all land. So in a desert, only 0.5% is a wetland. Our park, about 5% of our park is a wetland, which means that we have a very important resource here that is critical. We've talked about 3 different themes. The first one being water. We're going to see the effect of it today throughout this hike. It's a very important part of the hike. The second theme is escape. Not only do people come out here to escape, but animals do as well. This is a wonderful spot for migratory bird activity. And then the third is conservation. These 5% of our lands in this park that were wetlands would have all been demolished and paved over and turned into a subdivision. Where we stand would have been a driveway, somebody's home, somebody's road to their house. So it's a really important thing. All of these 3 things we can come back to time and again throughout the hike. The last thing to notice here is as we transition out of this wetland, we're going to start walking into the blackbrush community. It's named after the dominant plant blackbrush, which once you see it, you will know it forever. It's hard to forget it once you've seen it. Any questions so far? All right, let's move on up into the blackbrush. What I like to focus on here instead of individuals are communities. Communities are easier to remember, they're easier to observe, and they kind of make more sense to us. We all live in a community, right? And this is a great way to drive the point home to a visitor, especially children. I think it's really important for children to understand what a community is out here. And that's because as conservationists, we're concerned with the community as a whole, not just the individual. Sometimes an individual is a keystone species. The community falls apart. And that's a really important lesson for any of us, especially for the children to learn. We're going to make a branch here to the right. We're going to look into the club. Have we been to the cemetery yet?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll take the obligatory stop there. So looking around us right now, we're now in the blackbrush community. You look to your right, there's a dominant brush. It is black. Darker colored, we could say, and that is the blackbrush. There's a couple more examples of it, visually striking, that we'll see along the hike.
So they're not dead, huh?
Yeah, they're not. They live on only 4 inches of rain a year. That falls on 1% of the calendar days. That's only 3.65 days of rain in the entire year. For kids, I always like to sum it up like this. Imagine going 100 days, getting 1 glass of water, and then having to wait 100 more. That's what these plants do. Here's the cemetery. Our Wilson family is buried. Probably a good moment for a water break if anybody wants it. I'm going to take mine. So, I'm not going to belabor the point of who's who because we've learned a lot about that. What I will show you though as an interpretive tool, which is nice, this picture right here is actually the arrangement of the sites. So in the back you have James, and on either side you have Buster off to Looker's right, and Boone off to Looker's left. And the same is true, you have James, Jim Jr. in the bottom right, left-hand corner, and then Tweed in the bottom right-hand corner. Just a quick reminder, James starts the property, he adopts Jim Jr. and Tweed has 2 sons, Buster and Boone. I always like to make a point to visitors that this is a very important part of our history as a community. James Wilson and others saw vision here. They came here with this idea that there could be more than just a dusty desert. And in 1905, when the railroads come through and create our community, that really begins the beginning of our story as well.
Okay, so Boone's got some frogs on his restitution.
Yeah, so Boone is a self-styled shaman, and according to his family, he would use the carcasses of the chuckwalla for medicinal purposes.
Okay.
So that's what they signify, is what I've been told.
Okay.
Those are the kind of details that left over in the clay. This is the actual coral itself. This piece right here is ancient coral. This is a really neat piece of rock, one to show because it's just fun to look at fossils. This is the focus of this type of tour. But two, it's important because these kinds of phenomenon, these kinds of evidence lead scientists to start asking questions. And it's questions that lead to hypotheses, and it's hypotheses that lead to things like theories, which we'll talk more about today. One of my lofty goals here on these hikes is to try and impart a little bit of scientific literacy on my visitors. It's something that we as a community could always strive to have more of. Because we love our technology, right? But it turns out technology is deeply based in science. So it's good to know where our things are coming from. Kind of like history, right? Have you guys noticed the poop on the ground? Scat is a good thing to talk about. Scat's important because from a biology standpoint, it lets us know who is here, what are they eating, how many of them are here, and are they healthy? We've passed a couple piles. Most of it's been burrow dung, which I think all of us are probably familiar with what that looks like. But we've also passed a couple piles of coyote scat. Coyotes are predators. They're omnivores, though. They're not strict carnivores like the cats or bobcat and mountain lion. They're omnivores, so they'll eat plant material as well as animal material. That makes their poop pretty readily identifiable because it'll have bits of plant matter in it. It looks a lot like dog poop. That's also a helpful way to identify it. As we start walking up this hill, notice the transition of the stone under our feet. Also, please be very careful. These little loose bits of rock, when they get stuck between your feet and the slick stone, act like marbles. This is actually one of the most treacherous parts of the trail, this little slope right here. And then notice how we transition from that slick rock to this really bumpy mix of jumbled rock. It's important to note. We can see in the upper pasture over there by the Summer Theater parking lot, we have a couple of our maintenance people working on something. I have stood here on multiple occasions during my day hikes and seen coyotes and deer in that field from this vantage. So, always a good spot to stop, always a good spot to talk about the geography of the park, where we are in our landscape. The canyon behind us here, the Rock Escarpment, is made up of a multitude of different canyons and peaks. Starting on your far left, the peak is just coming out in the sunlight, very dramatic looking right now. Has different names. I like the name Mustang Peak, that one I've seen in multiple literatures, so I like to stick with that. And then the canyon between that and the next peak is Mustang Canyon. The next peak over is Sandstone Bluff. This one's important because this is what our ranch is named after. It's named after Sandstone Bluff and Sandstone Canyon, which is our canyon. Peek over, the one that's right here in front of us, off to the looker's right, just slight right, is Indecision Peak. Funny name, I have no idea why it's called Indecision Peak. Actually, I don't know why a lot of these peaks are named the way they are. It predates, I think, a lot of written record, and it was just handed down orally. lichen. I just want you all to take note of it, to look at it. We'll talk more about what lichen is when we move on. The sun's coming out. I think it's time to move on. Anybody have any questions for me? Cool. Let's keep moving. You know, I always joke with the visitors, if this tour was based on my personal opinion, the way the water forms and appears, this formation we're standing on is called the Shiner Rump Conglomerate Formation. Conglomerate's pretty easy to remember because look, it's a mix of stuff.
Yeah.
It's a big conglomeration of rock. This is a natural concrete formed as an ancient riverbed. It's actually called a paleochannel. I learned that from a visitor a while back. Now what's cool about this in our park specifically, this is the easiest place in the Red Rock Canyon to see the Shiner Rump conglomerate layer. If we look to our south, you can actually see it right at the same level, right out there past the Blue Spring cell tower. See those dark little bits of rock that kind of look jumbly there? And when we look north, you see Wilson's Pimple, which is that big one in front of Mount Wilson. This is really important for the springs. This rock is non-permeable. This rock does not absorb water, it actually reflects water, which means the springs that we see in the landscape are pushed to the surface by this layer of rock. This layer of rock is also really cool because you'll see things in it like petrified wood, animal parts, and rocks that do not make sense to the rest of the landscape, things like quartz and granite, which we do not have in this mountain range behind us. So the Shiner Rump Conglomerate, that's one of our 3 major layers of rocks. And it's important because it pushes the water to the surface. As we make our way down, do watch the step. This is where it gets pressure.